think it's a step forward that the court has recognized that in cases of sexual assaults involving Indigenous women and girls.
Tonight, the Supreme Court sends Bradley Barton back to court for the killing of Cindy Gladue. An update on the latest for the embattled Thunder Bay Police Services Board.
The land protectors has a huge impact on what's happening throughout not only this province, but through Canada as well, and maybe even globally.
And in the stand against Muskrat Falls, guilty or not guilty, the decision is now in a judge's hands. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The Supreme Court has ordered a retrial for the man accused of killing Cindy Gladue. Bradley Barton was acquitted in 2015 of killing the Métis mother of three. The jury's decision to set him free set off demonstrations across the country. While people are pleased Barton will be retried, it won't be for murder. APTN's Amber Bernard has the details.
The Supreme Court of Canada ordered the retrial after it found the trial had a number of procedural errors. But Barton won't be tried for murder. Instead, he will be retried for unlawful act manslaughter.
The verdict to send it back down to trial is right, but it's not a happy one because Cindy's family are going to have to go through this all over again, and it was a horror show to begin with.
In 2011, Cindy Gladue was found dead in an Edmonton hotel room. She bled to death from an 11-centimeter wound to her vaginal wall. The truck driver says he paid for rough consensual sex with Gladue the night before. His defense at trial was that consent was implied on the next night when Gladue died. The court said, the trial judge instructed the jury that there was evidence before them that raised the defense of honest but mistaken belief in communicated consent. In its ruling, the judges say the dozens of references used to describe Gladue, such as sex worker and native, may have caused the jury to form a prejudice in favor of the truck driver's side of the story. The court says because of this, there was thus no filter for the victim's prior sexual history and no specific warning to the jury to avoid drawing prejudicial and stereotypical assumptions about Indigenous women working in the sex trade.
I think it's a step forward that the court has recognized that in cases of sexual assaults involving Indigenous women and girls, that there's an obligation on courts, on judges, to be gatekeepers, to ensure that bias, prejudice, racism, and sexism do not form part of the evidence, are not what juries and judges rely on to make their decisions. This is a big step forward.
Taye says this is the reason sexual assault cases need more attention.
I think that we need to perhaps we need to think about taking sexual assault into its own specialized court.
Others say the retrial is still a win for Indigenous women in the justice system.
It's a step forward, a tremendous step forward for the courts to recognize the rights to justice of Indigenous women and the obligation of our judicial system to protect those rights and dignities of Indigenous women and girls.
The majority of the Supreme Court said the new trial will be restricted to manslaughter because of procedural errors, such as referring to Gladue as a sex worker, did not affect the jury's ability to determine whether Barton used a weapon to cut Cindy Gladue, causing her death. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The newest addition to Thunder Bay's embattled police board has been removed just days after he was appointed. On Tuesday, the province appointed Thunder Bay lawyer John Sear to the board. The calls for his resignation were almost immediate. Now there are calls for the mayor to remove himself from the board. A Thunder Bay lawyer appointed by the province of Ontario to the city's police services board is gone after a letter to the editor in the local paper resurfaced. In it, John Sear called Senator Lynn Bayak's comments on residential schools and the good they did, quote, balanced and thoughtful. Sear's appointment was almost immediately met with calls for his resignation. Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler, in a statement, said, It is unacceptable and insulting that a person who has expressed support for Senator Bayak's racist actions would be appointed by the province to the board tasked with restoring the trust of this city's troubled police service with the Indigenous community. Policing is in crisis in Thunder Bay, and there's no place for a residential school apologist to service a community that is struggling to rebuild the relationship between its police service and the Indigenous population. On Friday, Cyr was gone. In a statement provided by the Ontario Office of the Solicitor General, says John Cyr's views do not align with those of our government. That's why, as soon as we became aware of Mr. Cyr's past views, the government acted to remove Mr. Cyr from the Thunder Bay Police Services Board. Chief Peter Collins of the neighboring Fort William First Nation welcomes the news.
You don't put people in place that support that kind of tone or that kind of discussion. The problems we have is this very reason why he shouldn't be sitting there.
Chief Collins is also calling on Thunder Bay Mayor Bill Morrow to be removed from the police board. Collins says the mayor fails to acknowledge through his words and actions that systemic racism exists in Thunder Bay.
If he really wants to sit at the police board, he should stand up and acknowledge the problems that we have in the city.
Collins says the mayor's actions and remarks are inconsistent with the recent investigation into the Thunder Bay Police Board by Murray Sinclair. That report found the trust in police among Indigenous peoples has eroded in part by a series of incidents. One of those involves the mayor's brother, Police Sergeant Jim Morrow, who on Christmas Day in 2006 placed a prank 911 call while on duty, imitating a First Nations woman. Morrow was disciplined with a 4-day suspension and was required to issue an apology. Mayor Bill Morrow did not respond to a request for an interview. And we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. No pipelines having been built has meant billions in tax dollars lost, so says the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. It held a press conference across the street from Parliament Hill to make that point. As Todd Lamoran reports, it was at the same time students were demonstrating for a cleaner environment.
Go green, go green.
A group of grade 7 and 8 students from Goulburn Middle School in Ottawa were on Parliament Hill today and accidentally found themselves across the street from a Canadian Taxpayers Federation press conference, where the message was that over $6 billion in tax dollars have been lost because pipelines haven't been built, which could fund 25,000 teachers for 10 years.
Or even exempt all 3 maritime provinces from federal taxes for a year.
Franco Terrazzano, Alberta director of the Federation, blames the federal government for not building pipelines and introducing legislation that will overregulate the industry.
Here's the problem, is that it's not just that we need Trans Mountain, but we need multiple different pipelines to get our products to Tidewater so that we can sell to many global customers.
Enbridge's Line 3 and Keystone XL are being built, and by 2022 these 2 pipelines will be bringing Alberta tar sands to the Gulf Coast. Energy analyst David Hughes says this fact is often overlooked.
I'm not sure why no one else talks about that, but in essence that will completely relieve the pipeline bottleneck at least until 2040.
Terrazzano acknowledged those pipelines, but said we shouldn't be over-dependent on the American market alone.
And I hear one thing over and over again is that, hey, we need pipeline to Tidewater so that we can reach global customers, not just the United States, but we should be trying to sell our products to as many customers as we can around the world.
The Trans Mountain expansion has been sold as a pipeline to the Asian market, but Hughes says the majority of the world's refineries for Alberta tar sands are in the U.S., and transportation costs to Asia would cut into profitability.
So the reality doesn't kind of match the rhetoric in that case, and likely a lot of the oil on Trans Mountain would just be shipped, as it is now, to West Coast U.S. refineries.
And what about those students on a field trip to Parliament Hill? They had an environmental message for everyone,
Our planet is dying, so I want to grow up in a world that's nice. I don't want to grow up in a world that's dead and gross.
More encouraging of doing things that are good for the environment, more new technologies and recycling and new clean energies.
And we need to help stop climate change for the better of the world, because a lot of people don't care, and all the kids are the future.
Todd Lamrand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, in the latest twist to the ongoing Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion dispute, the British Columbia Court of Appeal has ruled the province cannot regulate the flow of oil across its borders. The court ruled the NDP government's proposed environmental regulations would have improperly restricted the flow of oil through the province, and that it appeared to unfairly target the Trans Mountain project. That's a big loss for those wanting to stop the pipeline, but the BC government says they're going to appeal the decision. This environmental lawyer says this battle is far from over.
As we know, oil spills don't respect borders, and neither does climate change for that matter. And we know that when a spill happens, it can't be effectively cleaned up. So what we really should be thinking about is more protection, not less. And so I don't think this story is over.
A new episode of APTN Investigates debuts here after the news. We'll have a preview for you after the break. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. A sunny high of 20 for Halifax, 9 above in St. John's, 10 in Nain, sunny, and 16 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 21 with showers for Montreal, 19 and rain for Saguenay, rain, and 21 in Toronto, showers, and 20 for Ottawa and Sault Ste. Marie, 20 with the sun out for Thunder Bay, rain, and 15 in Sioux Lookout. Over to northern Manitoba, 10 under the sun for Puckatawagan and Thompson, 0 in Churchill. Sunny and 18 for Winnipeg, sunny and 19 for Brandon. 20 with showers for Swift Current, Regina, and Estevan, sunny and 17 in North Battleford, 15 under the sun in Meadow Lake. Welcome back. Hollow Water is an Anishinaabe community north of Winnipeg. Back in the 1980s, sexual abuse threatened to overrun the community, so they developed a groundbreaking program to deal with it. Now, some of the people who went through the program are using what they learned to stop a new threat, a sand mining project. Here's a preview of APTN Investigates Brittany Guillot's Justice Resurging, which airs tonight right after the news.
A generation that suffered abuse.
We haven't been given any real information from Chief and Council.
Found healing in a community-led restorative justice program.
The first thing that CHCH did was take people back to the land and connect them to the land, right, as part of healing.
And now, they're a generation of land defenders.
That's what CHCH represented. You know, it was a group of people who stood together and supported each other.
Ready to take on a mining project that threatens a trapline.
There needed to be some trade-offs. It's empowering us, it's revitalizing our worldview, our way of life.
It does take, you know, an incredible amount of courage to stand alone, especially when it seems like nobody's standing with you.
And CAJ APTN fellow Brittany Guillot is here to talk about her episode for APTN Investigates. Brittany, thanks for joining us to talk about your show. What motivated you to pitch this story?
Well, I first became motivated in university. I'm a criminal justice major, and so the topic of restorative justice comes up a lot in that. And I just wanted to find out if restorative justice practices and programs are sustainable in the long term.
And so you went to Hollow Water, and what did you find?
Well, we found that there's a silica sand mine project going on in Hollow Water, and it's threatening a trap line, and it's also threatening the restorative justice program that was developed in the 80s and 90s there.
And so, how did this story evolve, given that what you found when you got there?
Well, at first, I wanted the story to just be about restorative justice and the CHCH program that was going on there. And when we got there, we realized that this program was, this company was coming in and threatening to destroy the trap line, and we had to incorporate that somehow.
Well, Brittany, I've seen parts of this documentary. Looking forward to seeing it tonight, and appreciate you joining us to talk about it.
Thank you.
And you can catch that episode of Investigates tonight right after this newscast. Those resisting the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric dam have had their day in court. Details on that coming up. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Smoky and 18 for high level, 19 in Peace River. Showers and 21 in Medicine Hat. Showers and 18 for Edmonton. A rainy day on the west coast, 18 in Campbell River, Tofino and Vancouver. Sunny and 20 for East Lake and Prince George. Rain and 23 for Fort Nelson. 18 in Old Crow. 21 under the sun in Whitehorse. 25 above in Fort Liard, Trout Lake, and Wrigley. 19 for Fort Simpson. -2 with snow for Sax Harbor. Snow and +1 in Paulatuck. 0 for Repulse Bay. -2 for Chesterfield and Baker Lake, where snow is expected. +1 in Clyde River. +2 in Pangerton. Welcome back to Saskatoon now, where a woman was attacked in an inner city park by several youth who she witnessed throwing sticks and stones at people walking by. When she tried telling the kids to stop, they jumped her. The group of children, all under the age of 14, kicked and punched Bonnie Halcrow. She received scrapes and bruises from the attack. As a result of the incident, a 13-year-old girl was charged with assault. Charges aren't being laid against the other children because they are under the age of 12. Halcrow says she was just trying to get the children to stop harassing people.
Kids that walk up to strangers and throw sticks and stones at them, and I don't think that's right, and I said my part, and then they turned on me, and then just because of that, I don't hold no grudge against those children, and I would really like to see some of those kids involved, disciplined, maybe taken in a cop car for a ride along, maybe put them in a jail cell for 2 hours and see where their future is headed.
An out-of-control wildfire continues to burn in northern Alberta. It has grown to over 90,000 hectares. The fire forced thousands out of the town of High Level and nearby First Nations. While evacuation sites and hotels are at full capacity, a nearby Métis settlement is stepping up to lend a hand. Tamara Pimentel has that story.
Smoke fills the skies of Paddle Prairie Métis settlement in northern Alberta. The high-level wildfire forced elders, children, and those with respiratory illnesses to evacuate. But dozens of volunteers stayed behind. At the Paddle Prairie complex, food is prepared and doors are open to evacuees as they flee High Level and the surrounding area. The settlement is over 3 hours away along the evacuation route.
They were able to come here, get a meal, and they could also stay here for the night if they needed. And we had some of our community members open up their homes and also their yards if they had RVs or anything like that.
Conditions are dry and winds are currently pushing the smoke south, away from high level but toward Paddle Prairie.
Because the north end of our settlement is closer to fire, right? So
as a precaution, the community has come up with an evacuation plan for the remaining residents and visitors. But some members were among the thousands that had to evacuate high level. So some volunteers begin to drive north.
So we are on our way to high level, to the High Level Native Friendship Center. We were granted access to go and pick up supplies that we can distribute out to whoever needs it.
What was once a bustling town is now quiet, and the streets are empty.
It's so crazy. Look at it. It wasn't like that at all when we left the other day.
The team had a limited time to grab what they needed and leave. Non-perishable food, clothing, diapers, and traditional medicines are loaded up.
It's supposed to only be for the town of High Level, but considering the circumstance, we will distribute what we can.
The supplies are taken to the Fort Vermilion evacuation site, and the volunteers will provide stew and bannock to about 400 evacuees from all nations. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Paddle Prairie and High Level.
The Labrador land protectors have had their day in court, where they defended their resistance to the Muskrat Falls Hydro Dam. Now it's up to the judge to decide if they broke the law. Angel Moore has more.
15 people accused of breaching an injunction to stay away from Muskrat Falls say they were protecting the land. Lawyer Mark Grucci told the court they did not set out to break any laws. He says the court does not have to rule contempt, and that would be an opportunity for reconciliation.
It does help when there's a coming together and a communication, which is what reconciliation is all about. And I was essentially suggesting, where appropriate, exercising of the discretion not to find contempt would be a gesture in that regard.
The protectors say flooding land for a hydro dam threatens the environment with methylmercury and will taint traditional foods. Linda Saunders-McLean says their battle against Muskrat Falls has been worth it.
The land protectors has a huge impact on what's happening throughout not only this province but through Canada as well, and maybe even globally.
That impact may be in the courtroom as well if the judge applies reconciliation to his verdict. Grucci adds that courts have exercised discretion not to impose contempt, even if it could be legally justified. He also hopes the judge uses discretion in his verdict.
No one has been charged with breaching any orders for 2 years. And things have, in a sense, resolved in the sense that people are engaged with the system. And in fact, they engaged with the system in this case. They went in, they gave their testimony respectfully.
So now, for the land protectors, the wait for their fate begins. A verdict is expected in late summer. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Goose Bay, Labrador.
And that is your APTN National News for this Friday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around. That episode of APTN Investigates is next. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.